And hello everybody, welcome back to British Stan. I've got an absolute gold clip of Rachel Reeves out in Davos. Yes, she's our UK representative out there. And on the same day where it was announced that inflation has risen to 3.4% under her sort of stewardship. But essentially, there's a really hilarious clip where Rachel Reeves is basically telling the US to cut its reliance on Chinese minerals. Meanwhile, China already controls over 70% of rare earth mining and about 90% of refining, and ironically Britain is totally dependent on China, and here she it's just a hilarious clip. Let's get into it, guys. And then also, she doesn't stop there. She's also got a bit as well talking about her phrase that she coined, securonomics. Let's just get into some of this footage. It's hilarious. I can't believe she's representing United Kingdom out there in Davos. She really is clueless. As always, guys, hit like, hit subscribe, and let's get into it.
Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the British Report, your home for the sharpest, most unapologetic political analysis this side of the Thames. If you thought Rachel Reeves was having a quiet week, think again. We are currently witnessing what can only be described as a fiscal car crash in slow motion, played out on the global stage of Davos. While the Chancellor is busy rubbing shoulders with the world's elite in the Swiss Alps, the UK economy has decided to pull a festive prank that is not at all funny. Inflation is back, interest rate cuts are being shoved into the maybe next year pile, and the nightmare leaks coming out of the Treasury are starting to look less like a dripping tap and more like a burst pipe. Today, we are asking the question the entire country is whispering: is this the beginning of the end for the Iron Chancellor? Stay tuned, because the numbers we are about to reveal are truly staggering. Quick favour, if you are loving this, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers have not yet. It is free. Takes a second and means the world to us. Thanks, if you did. Now back to the show. You know that feeling when you have spent all month telling your friends you are on a strict diet, only to be caught face first in a kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning? That is essentially the week Rachel Reeves is having. For months, the Treasury has been singing a chorus of stability, stability, stability. We were told the budget was the medicine we needed. We were told the plan was working. And then the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, walked into the room and dropped a statistical bombshell that has left the government looking absolutely shell-shocked. The latest figures for December 2025 are out, and the news is, frankly, damning. The Consumer Price Index, which is the big scary measure of inflation we all have to care about because it dictates the price of our existence, rose from 3.2% to 3.4%. Now, in the grand scheme of the hyperinflation of a few years ago, 3.4% might not sound like the end of the world. But in politics, momentum is everything. This is the first time in 5 months that prices have actually gone up. It is an inversion. It is a reversal. It is the economy looking at Rachel Reeves's plan for growth and saying, "No, I do not think so." What is driving this? Well, it is a classic British cocktail of vices and vacations. The ONS points directly at hikes in tobacco duties and airfares. So, if you are a hard-working Briton who enjoys a cigarette after a long day, or were hoping to fly away from the gloom of January, Rachel Reeves has basically sent you a personalised invoice. It is the ultimate irony. A government that claims to be for working people is presiding over a spike in costs driven by the very taxes they implemented. It is like a plumber coming to fix your leak and accidentally turning your living room into a swimming pool, then charging you for the water.
She was stuttering all over the place. I mean, it took her ages to get a sentence out. And I've noticed with Reeves, when she's fibbing, she stutters. She's wrecked the British economy, and that Britain is the basket case. And what always gets me is, I think she's not well, because when she says stuff like she did today, where she said, in a volatile world, Britain is stable, trying to make out that, while everything is going wrong everywhere else, it's all going well in Britain. Well, it's not, because since Labour came to power, thanks to her policies, 220,000 jobs have been lost. We heard this week that something like 1,400 jobs a day have been lost in the past couple of months. The hospitality industry is on its backside, thanks to her. We've got higher taxes, we've got hikes in the minimum wage. All of this is making life really difficult for business. And there is she saying it's all peachy in Britain.
But wait, the rabbit hole goes deeper. If the headline figure is a headache, the core inflation is a full-blown migraine. Core inflation, the stuff that excludes the volatile bits like energy and food, remains stubbornly at 3.2%. It failed to budge. It is the economic equivalent of that one guest at a party who refuses to leave long after the music has stopped and the lights have been turned off. This stickiness is exactly what keeps central bankers awake at night, clutching their calculators in terror. And speaking of things that are staying up, let us talk about your kitchen cupboard. Grant Fitzner, the ONS chief economist, highlighted basic staples like bread and cereals as upward drivers. When the price of toast becomes a political crisis, you know you are in trouble. We are not talking about luxury caviar or artisanal truffles here. We are talking about the basic fuel for the British workforce. If people cannot afford a sandwich without checking their bank balance first, the year of turning a corner is going to feel more like the year of walking into a brick wall. If there is one person enjoying this chaos, it is Sir Mel Stride. The Shadow Chancellor did not just react to the news, he practically performed a verbal autopsy on Labour's economic strategy. Stride was out of the blocks before the ink on the ONS report was even dry, blasting what he called Labour's economic mismanagement. His argument is simple but effective. Inflation is rising because Labour made the wrong choices. He points to a record-high tax burden and what he calls irresponsible borrowing as the twin engines of this new inflationary fire. According to Stride, the budget is unravelling day by day, and honestly, it is hard to argue with the optics. When you tell the public that their pain is necessary for future gain, and then the gain turns out to be everything is more expensive, the public tends to get a bit prickly. Stride's rhetoric was punchy, even for him. He claimed that with every negative metric, Labour demonstrates they do not have a plan. He even threw in a jab about backbone, suggesting only the Conservatives have a leader with a strong team and a clear plan. It is the classic political "I told you so." It is like watching a friend try to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. You know they are going to end up with a pile of sawdust and a leftover screw, and you are just waiting for the moment they finally admit they are lost. The problem for Reeves is that Stride's narrative is starting to stick. In the court of public opinion, the Tory mess excuse has a shelf life. After 18 months in power, you eventually stop being the new tenant and start being the landlord. If the roof is still leaking, people stop blaming the previous owner and start looking at you. Every time the price of a loaf of bread goes up, the Tory mess defence loses another ounce of its power. Now, while the ONS was dropping these truth bombs in London, where was our Chancellor? She was at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Yes, nothing says I understand the cost of living crisis quite like a mountain retreat for billionaires. Speaking from the snowy peaks of Switzerland, Reeves pledged that 2026 would be the year that Britain turns a corner. She insisted her number one focus is to cut the cost of living. To be fair, she did list some genuine measures: £150 off energy bills, a freeze to rail fares for the first time in 30 years, and a freeze to prescription charges. On paper, these are solid, tangible wins for the average household. But there is a massive disconnect between the micro wins Reeves is touting and the macro fail that inflation and interest rates represent. It is like being told your Netflix subscription is free for a month, but your rent just went up by £500. The money off bills is great, but it is being swallowed whole by the money out of pockets caused by inflation. Reeves told the Davos crowd, "Money off bills and into the pockets of working people is my choice." It is a nice line, but the ONS suggests the choice being made by the economy is quite different. The optics of Davos are always tricky for a Labour Chancellor, but when the domestic news is this bad, it looks less like a diplomatic mission and more like an escape. While Rachel is talking about momentum to CEOs in expensive suits, the people back home are looking at their mortgage statements and feeling anything but momentum. If there is one group of people who should be truly worried about this news, it is anyone with a mortgage. For months, we have been told that interest rate cuts were on the horizon. We were waiting for February like it was the coming of the Messiah. But Yael Selfin, the chief economist at KPMG, has just poured a massive bucket of ice water on those hopes. Selfin warned that this latest inflation tick-up closes the door on a February interest rate cut. That is a sentence that will send a shiver down the spine of every homeowner in the United Kingdom. It means the higher-for-longer nightmare is set to continue. If inflation is not behaving, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, the MPC, simply cannot justify lowering the base rate. Selfin did offer a tiny silver lining, suggesting that the rise was driven by volatile categories, like those pesky airfares, and that the MPC might look through it. But central bankers are famously cautious. They do not look through things, they stare at them with a magnifying glass and a frown. With wage growth continuing to slow, the hope is that services inflation will eventually ease, but for now we are all stuck in a high-interest purgatory. Imagine you are trying to land a plane. You have been circling the airport for hours, the fuel light is blinking, and just as you are about to touch down, the control tower tells you there is a stray dog on the runway and you have to go back up for another hour. That is what this inflation news feels like for the British economy. We were so close to a soft landing and then bread prices. As if the domestic situation were not messy enough, we have the looming threat of international trade wars. Specifically, the return of Donald Trump and his fondness for tariffs. Trump has been making noise about new export taxes, and the impact on the UK could be devastating. The Liberal Democrats were quick to jump on this, with Treasury spokesperson Daisy Cooper describing the threat of new tariffs as hanging over British families and businesses like the sword of Damocles. For those who missed that day in history class, the sword of Damocles is a metaphor for an ever-present peril. And in this case, the peril is a trade war that could drive inflation even higher.
So we're back here again talking about tax rises, and this time it's NISA, the country's oldest economic research institute, which is warning that the Chancellor needs to find some cash if she wants to meet her fiscal rules. So what exactly has gone wrong this time? Well, back in March, the Chancellor had £9.9 billion of headroom against her fiscal rules, those non-negotiables, the main one being to make sure all day-to-day spending is covered only with tax receipts, so no extra borrowing. Well, this is how quickly everything's unravelled. First up, the government's decision to reverse its cuts to the winter fuel payment. Well, that's £1.5 billion it no longer has to play with. Then, its welfare reforms, the ones it couldn't get past its own party. That's £13.7 billion gone. And then higher than expected spending, partly because of interest on government debt. That's £14.3 billion. And this is the big one. Growth, weaker than expected economic growth and employment. And that could wipe out £22.2 billion. And growth is important because more growth means more tax revenue. And Labour have promised it, but so far we haven't seen the results. NISA's forecasts, as you can see here, are consistently lower than the Office for Budget Responsibility, which has traditionally been more optimistic than other forecasters.
If Trump follows through on his threats, the cost of goods entering and leaving the country will spike. This would make the current 3.4% inflation look like a walk in the park. The Lib Dems are demanding that the government stand up to Trump, but how exactly does one stand up to a man who views trade deficits as a personal insult? Daisy Cooper's critique was sharp. Inflation ticking up while families continue to struggle is a sign of a government totally unwilling to fix this country's economic malaise. Malaise, now there is a word you do not hear every day. It basically means a general feeling of discomfort, illness, or lack of well-being. It is the perfect description of the current British mood. We are in an economic malaise and the Chancellor is in Switzerland talking about momentum. Finally, we have to talk about the nightmare leaks. It seems like every single day another piece of confidential information is finding its way into the hands of the press, whether it is internal friction between Downing Street and the Treasury, or early drafts of policy changes that have not been vetted. The government is looking increasingly porous. When a government starts leaking this much, it is usually a sign of one of two things. Either the staff are unhappy and trying to sabotage the leadership, or the leadership has lost control of the narrative so completely that the truth is just spilling out of the cracks. For Rachel Reeves, these leaks are a nightmare because they undermine the one thing she needs most, the image of competence. If you are the Iron Chancellor, you cannot have a leaky office. Iron does not leak. But the constant drip of bad news combined with these blip inflation figures is creating a sense of terminal decline. The whispers of Reeves forced to resign are no longer just coming from the fringes of social media. They are starting to be discussed in the corridors of Westminster. So where do we go from here? Rachel Reeves says 2026 is the year we turn a corner. But if that corner leads to more inflation, higher mortgages and a trade war with the United States, then perhaps we should have stayed exactly where we were. The pressure is mounting, the numbers are turning, and the clock is ticking for the Chancellor. Will she survive the spring, or will the nightmare leaks eventually become a flood that washes her out of Downing Street? Only time and the price of a loaf of bread will tell. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you in the next one.